Strategic planning hit the management scene in the mid-1960s and has been a staple of organizational leadership practice ever since. Put simply, a strategic plan is the roadmap that describes where a company or department aims to go for the next year or more and what steps need to be taken to get there. On paper, strategic planning helps everyone in your organization work smarter, because the plan helps all team members work in the same direction. But when strategic planning goes awry, it can lead to a lot of confusion, drama, and hurt feelings. There are a lot of ways that your strategic planning can go off the rails. Maybe the leaders don't see or are even avoiding the big problems in your organization. Maybe you are concerned about digging up old bones. Maybe you've done this a time or two and watched a binder full of great ideas rot on the shelf. This episode, we will learn why many plans fail, how to get the skeptics in line, and what you should be thinking about when you create a strategic communications plan.
Strategic planning is hard because we don't know how to do it, but so many people think it's more complicated than it is.
Let's get the planning party started. Welcome to the Internal Comms Procast. The Internal Comms Procast is sponsored by Circle. Circle provides personalized email, intranet, and app engagement solutions for diverse workforces. Let Circle make your communications job easier. Learn more at cerkl.com. Circle, weird spelling, awesome engagement. Welcome to the Internal Comms Procast. I am your host, Barry Williams. Whether this is your first strategic planning rodeo or not, this episode's guest has some great ideas on how to make your planning process a success.
I'm Sean Williams. I'm the Vice President and Practice Lead for Internal Communication and Employee Engagement at True Digital Communications, and I'm an adjunct professor of public relations in the journalism mass comm sequence at Kent State University.
Like many celebrated internal communication strategists, Sean's path to success wound through many industries. No one was more surprised than his parents when he chose business over a career in the performing arts.
The irony is that you have these ideas about where it is your life is going to go, right? My parents were in show business, and the expectation would be that I would be an actor or a singer, or at the very least a technician working in the theater. And they were very disappointed when I entered the management training program. You know, they said things like, "Well, honey, I know that's not really what you want to do," etc. So I did a whole bunch of things in between discovering myself in public relations and sort of growing up. I did work in the theater. I did work in the motion picture and television industry. I worked on the A-Team, if you remember that show, and several other shows by the same production company. I worked on the Dukes of Hazzard, if you can imagine that. All kinds of great sort of 80s, late 70s, early 80s sort of stuff. And then I discovered that was a lot of work, man, lifting heavy objects, and, digging holes, all the rest of that stuff. I said, I'm going to go to college and go to think about something else to do. And it took quite a while to go through college. I had been, let's say the family is of somewhat limited means. And as a consequence of that, I had to sort of pay my own way and work my way along a little bit at a time. So got an associate's degree in broadcasting, and that took me about 9 years. And then finally was able to go back and finish up the bachelor's degree and then eventually a master's degree. I'm the second most educated person in my family. My sister is a PhD. So I don't get bragging rights anymore, but at the very least, I get to be an educated guy, which is kind of a cool thing.
Sean's career in internal communications began in a most unexpected way.
I got started on internal communications by falling into it. I had been accepted into a management training program of a bank. And in the course of putting me in the program, they came to me and said, "Hey, you've got background in the news media. You worked in radio. And our corporate relations guy is looking for someone who can write. Would you mind meeting with him?" And so I met the guy who was the regional head of public relations for this bank, and he gave me a writing test and pronounced that I would now be doing, instead of going through my sequence of training, I would be working with him for the foreseeable future. They had just completed one merger, and they had two others on the horizon. And all told, over the course of the next 11 months or so, we did 8 mergers. Some of them were pretty small, but the sequence of activity was about the same thing. So by the time I got to the end of that, I wasn't much interested in being a real banker anymore, and consequently became the head of internal communications for the state of Washington. And the rest, as they say, is history, going on nearly 30 years now.
Over the course of his career, Sean has been on all sides of the strategic communication planning process, a participant, facilitator, and consultant. Although it's one of his strengths and a big part of his communications practice, Sean understands that strategic planning doesn't come naturally to many communicators.
I think one reason why strategic planning is difficult for internal communication people is that it's an alien concept. We do what we might call communication planning, where we look at different channels, content that goes into the channels. We may measure the effectiveness of the channels, but we're really not connecting those communication activities enough to the broader key performance indicators. I mean, there's a theme emerging here, right? We need to connect these communication activities to broader performance indicators. If we don't do that, then we risk being irrelevant.
If the thought of embarking on the strategic planning process makes you break out in low-level hives, a shortcoming of institutional knowledge might be to blame. Sean suggests taking a hard look at the whole business to make sure you understand each function and goal.
I think at some point, you look as an internal communicator and you have to self-evaluate. You have to look and say, how much do I really understand the operation of the business? How do I understand how we make money, how we save money, how it is we create products and services and serve customers? We have to look at ourselves and reflect on the extent to which we understand those things, because only if we understand those things can we create communication programs, communication processes, communication activities that will be effective in the long haul.
Sean shares the simple-to-follow framework behind the strategic planning process he developed and what to do when the planning process goes sour, after this message. The Internal Comms Procast is sponsored by Circle. Circle automatically personalizes your staff newsletter, website, and intranet using the content you're already creating. Let Circle help you measure and increase employee engagement while saving your team more than 40 hours a month. Learn more at circle.com. That's CERKL.com. Circle. Weird spelling, awesome engagement. We're back with more insight on effective strategic planning with longtime communications practitioner, consultant, and professor Sean Williams. One of the first decisions you need to make when starting the strategic planning process is which planning model you will follow. Clearpoint Strategy has a great list of options. We'll link them in the show notes. One that I like to start with is SWOT. SWOT, spelled SWOT, stands for Strengths, Weaknesses, Opportunities, and Threats. Strengths and weaknesses are considered internal factors, and opportunities and threats are considered external factors. This simple framework can give you an overview of where things stand in your organization. If you're feeling nervous about an upcoming planning session, you can perform a SWOT analysis alone to help you anticipate where the discussion might lead. For strategic communications planning, Sean likes to use AMMO. Sean developed AMMO when he and his wife were working on a website for a new nonprofit. As he talked through the necessary elements, the AMMO acronym emerged: Audience, Message, Method, Objective. Sean has been using this process for years now and feels that it's the simplicity that makes AMMO shine.
It's a very simple, almost simplistic process of planning that's designed that way. It's made so that you don't wind up with some sort of binder on a shelf that you have to refer to for every single detail of what you're going to do. Instead, it's a way of thinking about the work. You start with audiences and you ask, what do I need these people to think, feel, or do? Then what are the messages that I need in order to realize those objectives? And then finally, how do I deliver those messages? How do I conduct those activities? So audiences, objectives, messages, and methods, when you think that way, you're able to do it on the fly. And then it's not so intimidating. It's simple. It's not, 7 different pieces in an acronym. And it isn't, every single detail fully formed and wordsmithed to the nth degree. Instead, it's a way of thinking about the work so that it imbues everything you do with strategic planning. And it's not something that's seen as separate.
With your preferred model in place, it's time to bring the right people to the table. You might be tempted to curate a gathering of your favorite innovation-minded staff, but Sean encourages you to reach out across your entire organization to create a truly forward-facing and truthful strategic plan.
So when you're starting strategic planning and you're choosing who it is that needs to be at the table, we are big fans here at True of integration. We like having big groups of people from different departments have the opportunity to weigh in and be a part of the process. It isn't something that we want to restrict only to the communication folks. And the reason why we do that is that it helps to generate buy-in as we create programming down the road. If people feel like they've got, as we say, some skin in the game, or if we feel like different stakeholders from around the organization have a chance to weigh in and offer their suggestions, then they're going to be more likely to support us in the future. And besides, we're going to make much better plans the closer we can bring the planning process to the business itself. So, for example, we do work with schools from time to time. And we always say, bring everybody, bring the people who are responsible for admitting people into the school, bring the people who are responsible for raising money in support of the school, certainly have your communications and marketing people, but also let's get representatives from the parents in there. Let's make sure that we've got some staff people who are actually interacting with parents and students on a day-to-day basis. Let's make sure that the faculty is represented as well. When we do that, it's a much more robust conversation that's much more grounded in the business of our business. And it makes for much better plans and more effective plans that have more buy-in.
Once you're in the planning process, it can be easy to lose sight of what the true goal of all of this is. Emotions can run high. Egos can reveal themselves, and interdepartmental dramas, old and new, appear and disrupt progress. Don't get caught up in it. Throughout the process, Sean says there is one thing you need to keep the focus on.
Objectives. Objectives are everything. If you do nothing else in communication planning in internal comms, if you do nothing except objectives, then you'll start yourself off the right way. That's where people often do sort of fall down. They haven't really thought through the exact set of objectives that they need. They have not they've not considered the differences in different kinds of audiences. And internal comm, especially, there's a tendency for us to think of employees as this monolithic group. We add in the AMO process, we say, we'll start with your audiences first so you can get enough objectives. But like I said, the objectives are really what are going to drive you. The objectives are what are going to create the message architecture and the message platform. The objectives are what drive how it is you communicate. And so without the objectives, you really have nothing. And it doesn't have to be, I hasten to add, it doesn't have to be that these objectives are going to be 100% smart objectives. They can be what we might call general goals. The idea here is to start the conversation when talking about audiences in terms of what it is we need those audiences to think, feel, and do. And I'm aware of the fact that even the use of the word audience can be a little controversial. It implies a passivity that really isn't indicated, but it doesn't make a cool acronym if you use stakeholder or public in there. It just doesn't work as well as audience. Anyway, the idea here is you hit the audiences hard, articulate what the objectives are, and then and only then do you move on to the sort of content of your program, what the messaging is and how it is you're going to deliver that stuff. So objectives are number one. You get those right and you'll be on the right track.
As Sean mentioned, it can be really easy when planning to imagine your organization's staff as a large homogeneous group. But that sort of thinking could lead you to another one of the stumbling blocks Sean often sees in his work.
So that's a secondary sort of stumble point here as well, is that you haven't thought through specifically the different audiences that exist within your organization and what the different objectives are for each. An example would be, you tend to think of, we have to get employees on board. And then you realize that, whatever this thing is, it's really something that applies only to a certain group of employees. It's that what's in it for me or who cares question. Who are those people that are really going to care about the new SAP implementation, which I've worked on 2 of those. You get a new system for your invoices. Well, it's really irrelevant to you unless you process invoices. Unless you've got, expense stuff that you got to do, you're not going to be involved in that stuff. So there's not enough of thinking carefully through who it is you're communicating with and what you need them to think, feel, or do. And that's how it is you overcome it, is you stop and you say, okay, wait a minute. We're getting all caught up in ourselves here. Let's sit back and think about who it is we need to communicate with and what do we want them to think, feel, or do. And that should inform the entire way that we go about our business. And that should make our lives easier. And trust me, it does.
No matter how well you plan or how thoughtful your approach is, there may be people in your organization that don't understand the purpose of the plan, or even your department. Sean says there's only one thing to do.
Fire them. No, I'm kidding. You can't fire them. You can't abuse them. You have to do the things that are most important, regardless of what sort of resistance you encounter. We're of the opinion here at True that resistance is a gift. So it's okay. It's one thing if the hater's just hating. It's another thing entirely if there's some sense of reality to what it is they're objecting to. And so what you have to do as a leader is you have to draw this resistance out. We have this concept we call wide and shallow, narrow and deep. Wide and shallow, narrow and deep. Usually when a person says, employees are going to hate this, what's our initial reaction? We try to stop it or block it or explain it away. We want to dismiss it, right? I mean, we say, no, I think it's going to be different this time. This is an important sort of effort, and the employees are going to be really interested in it. And I say, no, it's just going to be another flavor of the month. Really doesn't have anything to do with their day to day, and they're not going to be happy. And so, what my reaction should be, and what other internal communicators should do, is draw that resistance out. So they should ask the question. So if we did this before and it didn't work, what went wrong? If you say employees are going to hate it, what are they going to hate about it? Let's get to away from the shallow and more into the specific and narrow. Let's go deeper. Let's get people to tell us exactly what the issue is, because in the end, what it probably turns out to be is that this individual person maybe felt like they didn't have enough input into how the solutions might work. Or maybe they were in possession of data that we didn't have access to at the time when we tried this previously. So my point is, you got to draw it out. And you have to engage those people. And sure, there are going to be people who are going to hate, and what they want to do is complain and vent. And there's a limited sort of capacity of time that we have for that sort of thing. But I still think it's worth it to attempt to make that solicitation. Let's pull the general out and get more to the specific. And then the person is going to feel heard, and the person is going to feel like they have input and that they have a voice and they were able to exercise it.
We want to thank Sean Williams for sharing his insight with us this episode. You can learn more about his work at truedigitalcomm.com. You can follow Sean on Twitter at CommAmmo. Next time on the Internal Comms Procast, we'll chat with internet pioneer Mark Morell. Mark takes us through what content and messages work on intranet, what content doesn't drive engagement, and how your organization can make your intranet a truly valuable resource to staff.
Intranets can be very closed and very limited in and very much sort of set by levels of permissions and very restrictive, or they can be wonderfully open, vibrant entities that people can use to collaborate, to share information, share their thoughts. It's making sure that you get that balance right between what your organisation is looking for and what people will need on a day-to-day basis.
If you are loving the Internal Comms Procast, be sure to subscribe to our free email newsletter. Each week we deliver a free, personalized email newsletter full of news, events, and best practices from our collective of trusted internal communications thought leaders. Subscribe at internalcommspro.com/newsletter. Internal Comms Procast is produced by Super Awesome Media. Our executive producer is Rachel Foles. Connor Sweeney is our engineer, and Michael Musilli is our digital media specialist. Our theme music is Please Listen Carefully by Jawser via the Free Music Archive. Our intro music is Sea of Glass by our audio engineer, Connor Sweeney. Show notes and more are available at internalcommspro.com. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at InternalCommPro. Thank you for listening.